This is my Kawasaki ER5, my first big bike that I bought after passing my A2 bike test. What was originally going to be a budget bike to run just for a while turned into so much more when I fell in love with the bike, started modifying it, and ultimately committed to a ground up rebuild and restoration, building the ER5 into what would become my dream bike. If you're new to the channel or you missed it the first time around, come with me on the full story of Project ER5. Here's the key, and we're going to start with doing this and taking a seat. That set the tone, just cue the time lapse. And this is what my GoPro called a time lapse. Thankfully you only missed the 4 bolts that hold the rear fairing coming off, and now they are off, I've got a handy tip for you. Now, probably one of the best things you can do when you're doing a massive dismantle of something that isn't going to go back together for months, like this one, is clearly bag up and label all your nuts, bolts, trims, clips, all that stuff, just to make sure that you actually are able to find it again. And the best way you can do that is just with some of these, just some normal Ziploc freezer bag type things. Put all your mad nuts and bolts in there, and hopefully you won't lose them. And if you do, then you're an idiot. Read also me. When obviously what I'm going to do is try and put them in groups. So like all the bolts holding all the rear end assembly, things like the rear fairing, the handle, the rear number plate, the tail tidy, all that kind of stuff. Put all the bolts in a bag for similar things and then label it, for example, rear end bolts, because then hopefully all the same things for all the same stuff are together, like a Lego set. You put all the same bits together so it's fairly organised when the time comes to put it back together. So I'm going to do that. It's worth noting I have also disconnected the battery. You didn't see it on screen, but I have done that. And when you saw those grips hanging out of the sort of middle of the bike earlier, that's because I managed to drop a bolt down into the frame of the bike. And I still haven't managed to find it because I'm clever like that. But got a handle on the situation, we are going to get it back. Let's run it round the... there we go. Away she comes. One other bit of advice I am going to give you. When you're taking apart a bike, get some good photos of where all the wiring goes. It might be weeks or months before you see it again plugged in, and it's always a good idea to make sure you've got some reference for that. Even things as simple as the rear light, because wire it up wrong and you might be indicating when you're trying to brake or flashing hazards when you're putting fuel in. There we go. Sayonara. The rear end dismantling continues, with the tail tidy coming off with the indicators and number plates still attached, being sure to photograph which wire flashes which indicator. I then move on to the front end bodywork, just as Dad turns up to provide moral support and tea. Could you get me like a 4mm?
That'd be an 8 probably.
I haven't got an 8, I don't think. Oh,
Being rubber.
hey, there we go. It's another, there we go. The bodywork continues to come off with nothing left untouched. With the bike on the centre stand, I only remove one shock absorber for now to keep the rear wheel off the floor. Oh, they're different sizes top to bottom. Aha! There we go. Shocking. As the bike gets stripped down ever more, I reflect on the enormity of this project. It's only when you decide to strip a bike down to its bare components you realise quite what bare components there are. For example, this little lock, you saw me pop it right at the beginning to take the seat out. That's got to come out because we can't get to the bit of framework around it without coating it in paint or something later down the line. So these little Allen headed bolts have to come out. With a couple of clamps and a bracket undone to remove the end can and a lot of twisting and wiggling, we can turn our attention to removing the fuel tank. After undoing what appears to be the only bolt holding the tank on, we can then loosen the upper feed hose to drain what turns out to be a good couple of gallons of fuel out of the tank. It's worth noting we've got a door open to prevent the place filling with petrol fumes. The lower feed hose then comes off to drain the fuel in the bottom of the tank into a waiting fuel can. The bike having more fuel than we thought creates an awkward predicament.
We've run out of fuel cans in the garage. We've got some that are in the shed at the top of the garden, but obviously this can't be left unattended because it's currently draining all of its fuel into it. So I'm holding this and Dad is against the clock to go and get a fuel can from the shed. Here's hoping, because if this fills up before he gets back, it's going to make for an exciting video.
And sure enough...
Oh, shit. No. No. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. We ran out of can.
Oh, have we?
Yeah.
With the remainder drained into another can before being distributed amongst the other vehicles in the fleet, the tank simply lifts away, and after pulling out the overflow pipe, it's off and can be celebrated the only way that I know how.
Thanks a lot.
Next we drain the coolant, which gives us more clues as to the bike's history.
There we go. Look at that.
How good is
How
that?
nice and clean is that?
Gorgeous, isn't it? Look at that.
So this is why I think this engine's been rebuilt, isn't it? Because everything kind of, even when we drained the oil, it was like new.
It's looked after,
It's
certainly.
been rebuilt, I think.
This bit of engine over here is like being primed, doesn't it? As if it was going to be painted. Yeah, that does point to it being rebuilt potentially. Well, it's a good sign.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Removing the engine requires access all over, so next I move the rear end wiring out of the way, being careful not to bend it too far and damage it. Next, the radiator hoses are removed and the rad itself unbolted, all made that little bit easier with moral support and tea.
You got gloves?
Tea.
Oh, and you got tea as well. Oh, you're just a legend, you are.
You've been right round it with her.
I've been most of the way around it.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
Hey! Right, let's have a go at getting these headers off.
Crush bars out of the way and rad off, next the headers come off. This proves to be mercifully easy, with all the nuts coming undone with just a bit of force before the headers can be lifted off. No, really.
Everyone talks about the 10 mils, but I tell you what, 12 mils matter. That is amazing. And there we go. Manifold, headers, call it what you want, is off.
Next we can start preparing the engine for removal. The airbox comes off, the carb cables are labelled and disconnected, and the various coolant, fuel and breather hoses are tucked out of the way. The removable piece of frame on the right hand side is unbolted to free the engine, and with the chain slackened off and a jack supporting the engine on the sump with a block of wood, we can also start getting the engine bolts loose and removed in some cases.
Right, so there's nothing holding the front of the engine now.
No. Slightly scary thought.
Okay. So the only thing that's holding it now is the jack and this bottom bolt.
Right, pull that.
Eventually, with a stack of plastic tubs to cushion the engine placed underneath it, a strategic combination of the jack, my dad's strength and a lot of hoping pays off.
Do you want a bit?
Hang on to the frame just a bit.
Yeah, so it doesn't move. That'll be an engine out. I'd be very careful where you go from now because you're sitting on the
It
sprocket.
sound like I'm going to be able to lift it.
You're on the floor. You've actually touched down there.
That is out.
Hey! Great success.
Great success. Right, I've got it out.
I'll get it back in. Right, so the first thing I want to do is get all the sort of surface corrosion on various places of the frame sorted, because the fact of the matter is the frame is permanently exposed to the elements. It will get stone chipped and it gets weather on it. It does happen. You get a little bit of rust here and there, and there are a few little spots on the Kawasaki where that has started to happen.
This marks the start of the lengthiest bit of the project, using a die grinder with various wire brush and stone attachments to grind back all the spots of surface rust and any paint surrounding it. This is one area of the project that I do slightly regret. If I'd known this would be a few hours a day for a week of grinding back the vast majority of the paint on the frame, I'd have had it sandblasted or acid dipped to do it quicker. It's usually the case that rust, even if it's only surface, is worse than it looks, a beginner's trap that I sadly fell into.
I don't know, and then that happens.
To access all the areas affected by the surface bubbling, the strip down must continue. With the other rear shock unbolted and removed, we can take out the rear swinging arm. The big nut gets cracked and wound off before the bolt's withdrawn and the whole swinging arm can be lifted out. Seriously, with so little of the bike left, that really is all there is. Since we're now committed to fully stripping this bike, next the whole front end can come off as one unit. The handlebars are unbolted to make space for the central bolt to come out. The fork mounts are then unbolted and the bolts removed before the wiring and cables are checked to make sure that they'll clear. This retaining ring then releases the headstock bearings once undone with a C-spanner or a screwdriver. Then this cover comes off, followed by the casing for the bearings themselves. and then technology lets us down.
So slightly irritatingly, the camera chose the exact moment I wanted to capture to play up. So you don't get to see the whole headstock thing with the handlebars and the front wheel coming off, unfortunately. Believe me, I'm just as, if not more, gutted than you are. But you do get to see the result of it, which is that the whole front end is actually in fairly good nick. We'll wheel that over to the shed now where it's going to live for a little while.
On the plus side, it's doing a hectic wheelie at the moment. Running the front tyre in, put half a mile on it already. With absolutely nothing left to get in the way, I can crack back on with using the grinder to deal with the remaining rust on the frame, while Dad breaks out the sander and the 240 grit to prepare the crash bars and swinging arm for paint. With both of us going great guns, it's the work of just a couple more hours to get the remaining frame corrosion dealt with and the extra bodywork flatted down. Then everything can be lifted into a van and transported to the workshop. Next, it's my turn to pick up the sander and smooth the entire frame down, including the rough patches caused by grinding rust back and any remaining paint. With all the intricate shapes in the frame, it takes some time and patience to sand the whole thing smooth, but about 90 minutes later, we're left with this. A frame completely smooth and free of any rust or old paint. At this point, we call it a night, but the next day, Dad WhatsApps me these pictures. The whole frame, crash bars and swinging arm have been primed with etch primer, the best sort for painting bare metal, before getting 4 thick coats of gloss black. It's awesome to see the framework looking so good after all that work. This was the biggest single step of the build and now it's done. Now the foundations are solid, it's time to build the bike back up. We'll start by refitting the side stand to the frame before fitting a new sprocket to the rear wheel ahead of it being refitted.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that was literally already there.
Lovely.
That looks excellent. Nice. We can't mount the rear wheel until there's something to mount it to, so next, chain guard fitted, the swinging arm is bolted back into the frame, complete with copious amounts of grease and, naturally, talking to spec.
That's it.
Hey!
Lovely.
Right, hang on, don't let it fall over now.
No, but it's alright.
There you go.
One job done.
Swinging arm mounted. I'm not going to say in, but mounted.
Okay.
I think we celebrate with a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Without suspension, the swinging arm will droop and smash into the frame, so next Dad mounts up both rear shocks while I hold the frame steady, with some spare Seicento sound deadening cushioning the frame just in case.
Let's see how well this works then.
Right. Slide that through there.
Finally, the rear wheel can be fitted. Dad lifts it into place and I persuade the greased axle bolt to slide through the wheel and the spacer. After some wiggling, it slots through the other side and into the swinging arm.
Yes, yeah, we're in.
Then the end plates go on. Don't worry, I painted them later, and the securing nut is screwed onto the axle.
It's not going to fall out yet.
I like that. That's what we're going with. Essentially, it's not going to fall out. That's good enough.
The final thing needed to stand the frame up is the centre stand. The buffer and the stand itself are bolted together onto the frame before the spring is stretched between the two, and just like that, we've got a functional centre stand with some strong spring action. Next, it's time for fresh headstock bearings, a great way to transform the handling and steering feel of an old bike. New tapered roller bearings replace the old ball bearings, and after tapping the upper and lower races into place using a block of wood and the old parts as the occasional hammer, it's time for a test drive. That's better. Yeah, we'll go with that. It's delicious and it's quiet and it's smooth and it's greased up to the nines. There is a considerable amount missing. With all the new headstock bearings in, it's time to marry the two halves of the bike back together. We wheel the front end over to the frame and I lift the frame over the forks and slot them through the yoke. Or attempt to. With the weight of everything, cables hanging everywhere and the wheel wanting to roll away, it's really awkward to get everything lined up straight and at the correct height. After more swearing than I can put on YouTube, by some miracle we get both the forks in place. The central bolt in, the forks secured thanks to the magnificence of ratchet spanners, and everything torqued up. With the handlebars remounted, next it's time to start running all the wiring and cables through the frame, working out where the wiring for lights, earths and sensors will eventually plug in without getting crushed when you steer. With some things back in place and tidied up, as well as the headlight back on, it's starting to look more like a bike again. You know, apart from the obvious. The next day it's time to get the engine in, and to protect all the freshly painted bits, we start by wrapping the frame in plenty of foam. We can then lift the freshly painted engine off the table down onto some blocks of wood, and here at Miller Corner we pride ourselves on professional level videography.
The best bit of filming you've ever seen on YouTube.
We then lift it onto the jack to then roll it further under the frame and carefully jack it up into position. With the engine somewhere near, a bit of wiggling and levering lines the bolt holes up, and just lots of swearing later, we get the engine secured on the back with its bolts and bracket. And then it's on to refitting that removable bit of frame.
Right, them 4 bolts that you mentioned.
Yes, which are now 3, miraculously. There genuinely are only 3 of these, by the way. Just match it to those for me. Good.
Right.
This is why I told you to zip the bag up, because if you zip the bag up, you don't go putting things back in it.
Once the frame's complete, the front engine bolt can go in too, making the engine finally refitted and bringing an end to a fantastic day one.
Now that the engine is in, we can work on the frivolities of things like making it work down the line. For now, while Dad is off being a normal human being and having a life, I'm going to work on the bodywork, which for now means rear fairing bits, and these bolts are not wonderful. The trouble is with these bolts is that the threads on the underside go right through to the ground, which means they've spent their entire life exposed to the elements, and that means the threads are not wonderful, if I'm honest. I've cleaned them up with a bit of WD-40, which is a continued theme for this project, is every bolt, if it's even vaguely rusty or dirty, gets WD-40'd, and if it's an electrical contact, if it's a plug for something, it gets some electrical contact cleaner. Because it just means not only will things hopefully work a bit better, but things are easier to come apart if ever they have to later down the line. One of me bolts has gone walkabout. Oh. Where the bloody hell is that bolt? Where are you? Here, little bolt. Aha! Yes! We got him, ladies and gents. We've found you sane. That's going to go up in there like some sort of thing that's actually working. I have given these rear mudguard bits a damn good clean. They were incredibly muddy, so give them a clean before they go back on. It's easier to clean them when they're off the bike than it is when they're on it.
Then the wiring loom can be run through the frame right the way back to the tail light. The plugs get some electrical contact cleaner to ensure a consistent bright light, and then it's back to the cosmetics.
I've got the rear wheel out. You might be able to see just down here is where a rear wheel should be. And the reason for that is I had to take it out to get these bits of plastic bolted in. They won't go in with the wheel in place, certainly not that I can work out. And while I'm out with the rear wheel, I need to take the shoe carrier, the bit that holds the new brake shoes, and paint that, because at the moment it's silver on a black wheel, looks horrible. Right, there is the shoe carrier that goes in the rear wheel and holds the brake shoes, and you might notice, if you look carefully, that it's been completely sanded down and cleaned and masked up. And what could that mean?
Joe paints random stuff. Do-do-do. As is the custom, the shoe carrier gets 3 coats of primer, black paint and gloss lacquer before being left to dry overnight. The next day I mount the painted carrier into the rear wheel and refit it into the swinging arm, which by the way is quite a lot easier when the bike's the right way up. Next, the tail tidy can be bolted back on now the rear wheel's fitted for good and the indicator wiring routed through and reconnected.
Battery is in, tail tidy's on, wiring for the rear lights is done, rear light is on. Yeah, this is very rapidly becoming a thing.
To continue the progress of becoming a thing, the rear wheel stabiliser bar gets a respray in gloss black, as is the theme, before I bolt it back on and, naturally, torque it up.
Lovely.
Before disassembly, the bike sprung a fuel leak, probably thanks to these god-awful wire hose clips.
So, thanks but no thanks.
With the few crappy wire clips swapped out for far better hose clamps, our fuel leak is hopefully cured. It's then time for Dad to work his magic, rerouting the choke and throttle cables from the grips down through the frame and onto the carbs. This has to be done just so, to give a sharp throttle response without the cables getting trapped or snagging on anything when the bike turns. Also, if they're too tight, they might be permanently pulling the carbs open and raising the revs. This takes quite some time to fine tune, so I stuck the GoPro on a time lapse while I flatted down the foot peg brackets ready for their repaint. With the brackets sanded smooth and the throttle action looking and feeling good, the airbox goes back on and then it's time for wiring.
So that goes on there, and then that's gonna. No, hang on. There's one thing here.
Oh, good. I've just seen what I was looking for.
That's gonna go up through there, isn't it? It won't go in front of the frame.
That nut there is the earth. That's got to go to the battery.
And that's got to go onto this, yeah? There's a switch here with nothing connected to it, so it might well be that. Now there is.
Where does that go?
Right, well this connects up to. Where's that plug you just had? We've labelled that as starter.
That's battery, earth.
The battery is mounted with the earth connection on it. The fuse box is in place. All the things mounted to the frame to get earth are already on there. We've scraped the paint off on there to get a solid connection. Things like the side stand switch are all connected. Most of the wiring, in fact all the wiring, is pretty much in. We've got lights. We've got a headlight. Left indicator.
No rear left indicator. Have you got front?
Front's working fine. Yeah, that works.
So we've got a brake light. Hang on then. 2 seconds. Have we got
on the switch
a rear brake light?
Yes. Yeah. It works. It starts.
We've got oil light, which is good.
Oil light.
Neutral light. Have we got main beam light?
Yeah, we do. So we found the source of why the rear indicators weren't working. It wasn't something I've done for once. It's this bit of loom that connects to the main actual wiring then for them. And this connector, which should send the signal, is pretty munch. You can probably tell the plastic's all sort of chewed away. So we're going to get rid of this bit of wiring entirely and just hardwire those two wires straight into that bit of the loop. Let's give it a go. Ignition, right hand is on, and it's working. Winner, winner. Indicator dinner. Next, it's time to refit the engine crash bars. The bars mount through the engine bolts, so we loosen the bolts, support the engine on the jack, and carefully slide the bolts out. We then slot the bars over the frame and engine bolt holes, attach the brackets, and bolt everything back together. It looks so damn good, I'm going to do my best to avoid needing these crash bars. Then the bike gets a brand new chain and sprocket, a procedure that's part and parcel of bike ownership just as much as oil changes and tyre pressure checks.
Quick bit of housekeeping, this linking clip for the chain, always do it away from the direction of travel, because we initially put it on the wrong way round and then saw that it was on the wrong way round. Because if you put it against the direction of travel, it's less likely to come undone. If you put it with the direction of travel, it's more likely that if it does come undone, it will. So don't do what I did, do it the correct way. Like that.
Then the manky old radiator gets replaced with a lovely new one. The mounts, temp sensor and a good used fan are transferred onto the new rad, before the crusty guard also gets replaced with one custom made out of stainless steel mesh. The foot peg brackets and radiator side guards are then sanded down and given a fresh respray in bright silver to smarten things up a bit. You know what that means it's time for? Joe Paints Random Stuff. Do. Cue the montage. With the silver bits now more silvery, the next day the foot peg brackets get bolted back on to join the freshly painted chain guard. Once everything's tight, the rear brake lever goes back on, and then time for the exhaust. New header gaskets are held in place with a light coating of grease which burns off and causes the smoke that you'll see later. Then we can lift the headers, resplendent in their new coat of high temp black, into position. Getting the headers held on tightly by their clamps at the front, bolted to the frame in the middle, and lining it up in such a way that the end can fits correctly is a very fiddly job, definitely best done by 2 people to support the weight. After adjusting everything about 400 times and tightening it all up, we then need to see if it blows or not. We rig up a temporary fuel tank and attempt to start the Kawasaki for the first time in over 6 months. After topping it up with enough fuel to actually start it, finally the ER5 bursts into life and sounds like it's got an exhaust leak. Look closely and you'll see the copper gasket poking out, indicating that the right hand runner isn't sitting flush. So we slacken the other one off and tighten them up together to cure the leak and crush the gaskets. While we're round the front, there's one more bit to remove.
You might notice that the front wheel's now out, and that's because we need to get the mudguard off so that along with all the other bodywork can be sent off for paint. Trouble is, you have to take the front wheel out to get the mudguard off. There's 4 bolts up on here, 2 on either side. Ah, yeah. Oh, no, that works. Yes. To whoever designed it so you had to do it like that, I hate you.
The radiator's bolted up, the fan and sensor plugged into it, and the pipes plumbed in before we mix some sweet new coolant with deionised water to prevent limescale in the cooling system. And then it's time to bleed it. Despite having been stripped to its bare bones and now wearing a new rad and fan, the bike behaves itself and bleeds faultlessly first time. Once we know that it doesn't overheat and the new fan works, we can finally set aside the mechanicals and move on to the bodywork. I wire brush the underside of the tank before brushing on plenty of rust converter to do its thing. The underneath will also get a blowover with paint to protect it when the tank gets resprayed. Apart from the hideous colour, the bodywork itself is actually in really good condition, requiring minimal prep work. So I set to the various components with a mixture of sandpaper and Scotch-Brite, flatting everything back to a glassy smooth finish. After hating this colour from day one, it's actually really satisfying to sand it all away. With everything prepped, the body panels, grab handle and fuel tank are moved into the paint booth for 3 coats of primer, and then it's finally time to choose a colour. From the start of this build, I've been inspired by my bike's modern equivalent, the Z900 RS, and in particular, this colour that's offered on it. Candy tone brown, a gorgeous pearl brown that really pops in the sunlight. I therefore started looking for similar colours and happened upon this. BMW Brilliant Copper, which, as far as I can tell, was only offered on the old shape Mini Countryman and Paceman by extension, and the facelift i8, and, being metallic rather than pearl, is considerably cheaper to buy and easier to spray. Dad plays a blinder, respraying my old Kawasaki bodywork with 4 thick coats of the stuff. He then lays on 4 coats of lacquer for maximum gloss and buffing potential before leaving them for a few days to harden. Straight off the gun, this paint looks incredible and it'll only get better once it's been buffed. With the paintwork done, finally we can start the reassembly. The ER5 has been my biggest project yet. This little bike has been stripped right down to a bare frame before being built back up piece by piece, with pretty much everything being refreshed, repainted or replaced along the way. What I'm left with is, without question, my dream bike. The bike is pretty much done. Now there's a few tiny little things to tidy up, but on the whole it's done, and I'm genuinely getting a bit emotional. Bloody amazing, and
this isn't just a representation of my abilities, it hasn't just been me. As ever, my dad's been an enormous help, and I thank you, Dad. I know you watch my videos. This is just, thank you so much. I couldn't have done this alone. And
well, here it is. This project didn't make any sense on paper, but what I've ended up with, for the sake of relatively little financial outlay, is a truly unique bike. One built from the ground up exactly as I wanted it. Along the way I learned new skills, tried new things and experimented with tools and jobs that I've never experienced. And when I see the result, a bike that looks this good and rides this well, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, I might sandblast the frame next time.